So compare for us what it's like to mobilize your team to be here for this compared to the breaking news when you were in Orlando, as an example. I mean, what is it like for you and your team, the differences of a days-long event here and versus a days-long event like Orlando?
Yeah, they're completely different, as you know. You're in the industry. You know, when we travel into Dallas after the ambush on those police officers, or into Orlando after what we saw at the nightclub, you know, I always say we're parachuting in on those stories, and you arrive and you meet these families who have endured incredible loss. And, you know, I think in those moments it's always important for us to remember the pain that they're living through is going to exist long after we leave. So I think there's a particular kind of responsibility that comes with covering those kinds of stories. I think the convention that we're at right now is more planned, if you will. We've known about it for a very long time. We know the size of the team that we're going to bring to do it. But that said, this convention has been completely unpredictable every single day. I mean, Melania Trump said on night number 1, it wouldn't be a Donald Trump contest if there wasn't drama and excitement. And there's been drama every single day here.
Now, to mobilize a team, I mean, I can only imagine what the campaigns go through. But for ABC TV, and then there's, of course, ABC Radio, and all of your digital assets, and the web products, and the apps, and everything else, I mean, what is it like for you to be the leader of the brand for heading up a project of this magnitude?
Well, you're kind to say leader. You know, we have an incredible team, and you know, sometimes it's a very stealth team that goes in on a weekend when I can get out of that anchor chair during the week and try to go to the Syrian border or back to Mexico City, where we investigated children with disabilities being locked up in cages, and those kinds of stories that we think are important to tell in the few moments that we get a break from that anchor desk. I think on something like this, you bring that same team you always work with, but you're lucky because you've had some time to plan and prepare, and so you bring the sort of resources and the muscle of the digital team, you know, as you say, of ABC News Radio, of Good Morning America, World News Tonight, Nightline. All of us are here at once. And you know, it's not just World News Tonight that I do on any given day. We did, you know, our 360 virtual view, taking people right here in the convention hall. And so I think, you know, honestly, I feel like it's a privilege to get to do the evening news, but I think it's a particular privilege to do it in this moment in time because of the technology we have. Listen, I grew up watching Peter Jennings, and he was sort of the master at having a conversation with America. And look at the way the conversation sort of has evolved. The conversation is the same, but how we deliver it and interact with our audience is completely different. I'm looking here. I mean, you have like 3 cameras, a live Facebook stream. I mean, I don't know what else you're doing.
And not one of these cameras is worth over $500 tops. I mean, the times have changed.
It is, and I think it's actually a good thing. People talk about media saturation and, you know, what will the role of the evening news be? Our audience is as large now as it was 9 years ago. We're at a 9-year high, and that tells me that with all of the media saturation, all the different places we can get our news now, our smartphones from the moment we wake up in the morning, that despite all that, people still want sort of the clearinghouse, the place to sort of break through the noise at the end of the day. And, you know, I'm just grateful that a lot of people put their trust in us to do that.
Now, you will, at the end of this week, and I know we only have a couple more moments here to talk, but at the end of this week, I mean, you're going to pack up your bags, pack up this giant effort here, and then move the whole operation to Philadelphia, and do it all over again.
Here we go again. And listen, a lot of people have talked about how this was going to be the showbiz convention because it's Donald Trump, and I think that's been a bit of an eye-opener for a lot of people at home, and for us here in the convention hall. There hasn't been a lot of showbiz, with the exception of that first night when he walked through in silhouette. Everything else has been sort of unpredictable in sort of the tension we saw last night with Ted Cruz, and the division we saw on that first day with the roll call vote they tried to force.
Right.
With the Melania Trump speech. Tonight, everyone will be watching Ivanka Trump introduce her father and make history. Next week, a lot of people have said that will be the more traditional convention. The speakers, we know a lot of them. We know, you know, former presidents, you know, Hillary Clinton's husband, who we've seen on that stage before, Bill Clinton, obviously, Elizabeth Warren, and some of the names. And so all I would say is I would caution the viewer and caution our team, because a lot of people expected one thing here and we got something completely different. And so to expect that next week will be the traditional, I don't buy it now after having reported on this convention. I think there's a lot of things that we don't even know are coming, and you know, I can't wait to be there too.
Okay, our last question now for David Muir. Now, you are not only, I mean, you're the show horse, right? I mean, look, the guy's got great hair, great suit. I mean, he always looks fantastic every night on the news, but he's also the workhorse. I mean, there's a guy who, as he says, he'll go he'll go and you speak foreign languages, and you'll go overseas, and you'll go and you'll get into the story and talk to the people involved. And
where's he going with this?
Right, I know, right? So, but I know that you went out and you were talking to the vendors on the street and the protesters out there as well. So you're not just here where the show business takes place, but you're out there as well, talking outside the security perimeter where there's another story that's to be told.
If I didn't do that, something would die inside. You know what I mean? If we weren't interacting with the people who watch the news. I mean, that is what drives us every single night. When we tackle every story in the show, in this convention, our Made in America series is driven by the people we meet and the factory workers we meet and high-five them for trying to make things here. And it's funny you mentioned the languages. With our interview with the Pope in this last year, the town hall, to sit down with him. You know, one of the reasons I think that we were able to land that, and it was extraordinary. We had a team working on it for so long, and I'm just grateful to them to this day for working on that project. But they told the Vatican, listen, David Muir would be willing to do the whole thing in Spanish. So, and I said, okay, great, let them know I'm willing to use my Spanish. And then they said yes, and I was like, oh no, high school Spanish. How am I going to do that? I mean, I studied in Spain, you know, in college too, but I have not used that Spanish in many, many years. So, but those are the ways that you tackle giant projects. I then, you know, for 3 weeks worked with like a young professor at my house, speaking Spanish with him, you know, for 3 hours a day. But that's what keeps this job exciting and alive, and this is an incredible team. And you know, we know the Democratic convention's next week, but just think of all the things we don't know that are coming. Hopefully they're not all awful and tragic. We've had a lot of that in recent weeks, so it'd be nice to have some of the spontaneous, unexpected, but perhaps a little more joyful in the weeks ahead.
Well, I wouldn't be able to go home if I don't at least say my son Brooks is very excited that you and I are talking. I told you when we were in Orlando, Brooks says,
how old is he?
He's 10. There's twins, but Brooks and I watch what we call the David Muir Show every night together, and he is as obsessed with you as I am, and he enjoys watching you every night.
You tell Brooks.
Yes.
He's 10, right?
Yes.
So that gives me a few more years to do this.
Right.
And I'm just keeping the seat.
Oh, and he's handsome. He's got great hair, so he's well on his way as well. David Muir, thank you so much.
Thank you so
We're big
much.
fans.
Hi to Brooks.
Thank you.
Good evening, David Muir. Thank you for joining me here in Las Vegas. Darcy Spears here at KTNV. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you've discovered in terms of how the prescription drug issue is feeding the heroin epidemic?
Well, I have to say, Darcy, we applaud all of your reporting there on the prescription pain pill problem, and you'll see it tonight. And authorities say there is a direct link. I mean, there's so many numbers, but here's one example. 4 out of 5 new heroin users began with prescription pain pills. And in so many cases, that's, you know, the son or daughter on the soccer field, the football field with an injury, prescribed some sort of opioid, some sort of painkiller. Parents with pain pills still in the medicine cabinet. And this really knows no boundaries. You'll see it tonight. Rich, poor, middle class, all ages, but in particular young people. And if they can get their hands on some of the prescription pain medication, once that runs out, authorities say if they have an addiction to opioids, they can find that same fix. And here's what's frightening: far easier, far cheaper on the streets, and that's the heroin.
And an expert that we spoke to, his feeling is that this should not be treated so much as a crime problem, but more as a healthcare crisis. Did you encounter anybody with those thoughts?
Yeah, I think that is a central question to tonight's hour, and I can't underscore enough how brave these families were to allow our cameras into their homes for more than a year. They were the parents who loved their children, raised them well, and said, not my child. And somehow this found a way in through the back door. And they allowed us to document their fight to save their young loved ones and to sound the alarm in their communities. And I think that you'll see that the power and the grip this has over these families is something that we all have to help them out with.
Speaking of families, David, there's a specific Las Vegas connection in your report.
In so many of these families, you know, there are young people affected, and then when they start their own families, if they're not able to break free from addiction, then you've got a child, a baby, who then, you know, through no fault of their own, found themselves right on the front lines. And in Nevada tonight, you will see how our storyline starts, you know, in one corner of the country in New England, ravaged by this. Suddenly we're in Nevada on the hunt to find solutions and to find a loved one, quite frankly. and you'll see a woman in Las Vegas who plays a central role. You know, one of these typical stories of a loved one, a relative, a grandmother who has to jump in and try to save the family. And she's become an advocate, as so many people have across this country. Moms and dads who never thought this would affect them, now leading the charge, saying we cannot wait for the government any longer or for authorities. If we don't fight this, we're going to lose a lot of people.
Is it your understanding that authorities, because of the hyper-focus on a war on drugs, that they haven't legitimized the fact that this needs to be addressed in a more treatment way as opposed to a criminalized way?
Yeah, Darcy, I think you bring up a really important point. I think law enforcement, and I went right to the Drug Enforcement Agency and we asked them tonight, can we really arrest our way out of this? And they're extremely honest with me. And they said, you know, our answer is different from what we would have told you 10, 15 years ago, but they're quite honest, quite candid, that they can't do it alone. And in fact, it's no longer just arresting people. As you point out, it has got to be communities coming together to help treat this as a mental health issue, as addiction, and not something that you're going to be able to pick someone up off the streets and immediately solve the problem. It is far beyond that.
And there's a new face of heroin. These are your friends, your neighbors, your classmates, people that you wouldn't expect to become addicted to something with such a sordid past.
Well, you know, this is one of the things we find, you know, in covering heroin over previous decades, you know, it was largely, you know, a problem found in some of the big cities. And I think tonight you'll see that no community now is immune, that this is in suburban America, this is in rural America as well. No boundaries, young, old, rich, poor, parents who raise their children, they believed in loving and safe homes, and yet it still found a way to find its way into their lives.
We look forward to your year-long investigation. David, thanks so much.
This whole class, these are all Syrian refugees who are now coming to the United States. Many of them have been told which states they're coming to and which cities. And this is the cultural orientation class where they're asked questions. We're spending a whole year in this country tracking refugees from Syria who have come to the United States. Many of them with great hope for the promise of freedom, liberty, and education for their children. And many of them did not know that they were coming at that time here in America when we get so involved in the political discussion and the debate here. It's a presidential election season, and I think a lot of these refugees who were coming to America did not know they would be part of the immediate conversation about whether or not refugees should be allowed in this country. Is it safe? And I think many of them walked into something they weren't expecting. But they didn't know they would be part of this, flashpoint. This is actually a teacher who's prepping them for life in America. And they've given us a list. That's what I'm holding in my hand is after they take the class. Those are the locations where the families are going, and in many cases they don't even know yet what city they're going to, but we're holding it in our hands. Like a wide shot from the classroom. Ooh, that's good. I mean, literally, they go through a series of interviews and eye scans, and then one of the final steps is this cultural orientation class, where they go through the laws in America. Can you escape taxes was one of the questions.
Right.
You can't escape taxes.
Right.
And what's allowed? Can you walk across the middle of the street? And no, they have to explain that there's jaywalking. In that part of the world, you can really just cross the street wherever you want. Mm-hmm. And certain things that we sort of take for granted are just a part of our culture. Like the kids right there where you were, with like the mom in the back and the kids in the foreground on the street. What was interesting for us was to find out how many of them know that they're coming with this conversation in this country right now about whether or not we should be allowing refugees in, Syrian refugees, because of fears over ISIS and terror, global terror. And many of them, are quite aware of the conversation, and they had some interesting questions for me about what they face once they get here. Will they be welcomed? And politically, once they get here, is there any chance they could be sent home? So it was kind of interesting to hear their perspective.